Welcome, fellow synthesizer sickos. And tonight we're going to be checking out IconDrum, the brand new recreation of one of the most famous instruments of all time, the Behringer LM-Drum. Wait, no, the LinnDrum, or the LM2, created by Roger Linn in 1982, which in and of itself was a recreation of a previous drum machine. And the LinnDrum series, the three of them, all of the sounds are in this plugin. And I think that what's so incredible about GeForce is their integrity in capturing the essence of the sound, giving you the hands-on control of it, but also expanding it with great features like filter, distortion, EQ, a really wonderful compressor, which makes a huge chunk of the sounds in here. They also give you different MIDI files and everything. So it is a very awesome sounding plugin, and we're going to go through it tonight, you and I. So if you're new here, we do a live stream every Wednesday night here on YouTube. So please subscribe if you'd like to see more of this type of thing. And without further ado, why don't we just jump on in and check out all of the presets that we have. We have a lot of them. So we could go like crazy real quick. We could go industrial sound effects. And let's like actually turn it on. And so if we listen to that pattern back, but just with this, you can see that we've got a lot of character and sound to this that goes way beyond just your typical thing. So we got all of these different presets. I'm not going to play them all, but why don't we just go through a few of them. I'm going to just close this real quick, and I'm going to turn off the stuff that I don't need, and I'm going to just loop a little section here, and then we can come back up and so immediately one thing you'll pick up on is it's got that classic sound. And I mean, the LinnDrum was used on virtually every major hit of the 80s. I think people associate the Roland 808 as being the most famous drum machine of all time, and it probably is just because of the way that it was used originally by artists like Afrika Bambaataa, but to define the sound of hip-hop music. However, we're just talking the 80s, like what did everybody use? It's like Queen used this. Michael Jackson used it on Thriller. Kate Bush used it on her music. I mean, it's pretty much the thing. Prince used it, 1999, of course. Yes, it is Link 11111. So we're just going to go through the presets real quick here. So I love that we've got this preset tape basic. Yeah, you can see that on the screen, where you can actually kind of get a little of that. You get the feeling there. And you'll notice we have all of these different effects here. So if we wanted to go for like a phaser sound instead of the distortion, it's so quick and easy to go. Sari, welcome to the stream. DeCarmick, welcome to the stream. So another thing I should say, to the point of Todd, it's $30 for the intro sale right now, which is pretty incredible. If you want to get a Behringer LM-Drum, it's going to be $400. And so just right there, you know, I think a lot of people like Behringer gear because it's affordable, but it's not really as affordable as this, now is it? So just a thing to think about. Here's some more presets. This is software. Has a really great wonderful high end without even having to boost it. Can I get a scum cheers in the chat? Really get that distortion in there. Really highlighting the incredible reverb from Sine Vibes, I believe. Thank you very much for the scum cheers, guys. The reverb in this sounds great, and it's, again, very easy to use. Yeah, so just really quick how simple it is to get a sort of gated 80s reverb sound, you know, that Phil Collins type thing. Really crazy sounds, right? Woo! Mighty Pinto, welcome to the stream. That's funny. And I'd like to point out that as we change through here, all of these sounds are changing. And there's a lot more here than just the sounds, the very vanilla, you know, LM1, 2, and 9000 sounds, which you might get in something like the Behringer version. Here we actually have these different versions like modified. So that's going to give us this like higher end thing, I believe, if I recall from the previous drum machines I've checked out from GeForce, but we also have versions that are done on tape. So just checking out like the LM1 kick drum, for instance. Let's change presets to something maybe not as crazy. Oh, that's a pretty cool one. I don't believe you can load custom samples yet. So right now we're using the LM1 class, but why don't we just change that to the basic so we can hear the difference here? And we'll solo the kick drum. So you can see all of the samples have been recorded those different ways. So we've got class, mod, and tape. Tape definitely gives you the most distortion, but of course we have distortion here as well. Unfaithful Journey, welcome to the stream. vBrom is absolutely a very cool plugin. Doesn't come with effects, just the raw sound. What's great about vBrom is you can load your own samples into it. When we covered Oberheim DMX by GeForce, a lot of people brought that plugin up. I've got to do a stream on it because it does seem to be the standard. Oh, I'm just using my own pattern here. Actually, there's more to this than that. It actually comes with a bunch of drum files. So, like, for instance, if we wanted to drop in... what are we doing? We're doing like a BPM shuffler. Why don't I just drag this one in and see what this sounds like over here. I'll just loop this. So this is one of the Dave Spears MIDI files. We've got MIDI files from Alex Ball, Jordan Passmore, and Polydata. So those are all there. We'll check out a bunch of them. I'm not interested in not checking them out. But you're not like stuck on any pattern. Interestingly, this, like Oberheim DMX, doesn't have a sequencer built in. Which, when you think about it, kind of makes sense. Like, for the real estate of this, why spend the time putting in a sequencer when most people have a sequencer they love to use? I know I do when I'm working in the box. Or, you know, it's here is an instrument with effects, but it's not a sequencer, you know? Nice. Let's try a couple more here. I'm going to drop in, let's see, some Alex Ball ones. Let's try this one. Motown Revival 2. Breaking Free. Let's try this one. We'll try Drum Royalty. EEPROM Disco. We've got the pattern from Thriller here. So I'm using preset Lost 82 demo tape, and here's the Thriller drum pack. Obviously, I'm using the wrong preset for this, so we're kind of getting interesting variations. But I mean, again, it's just super cool what can be done here. Oh, wait, Thriller. Using the Thriller MIDI with the Thriller preset. So if you love that sound, it's probably also a really great starting point for making your own sounds. Like, obviously, there is an init preset, so if you want to do your own thing, you can. But this is probably where it's at if you just want to get that sound. Sorry, the price is $30 for the intro sale, which I think is very generous from them. We all spent so much last month for sure. V Collection, X, and FX Collection. I thought about getting FX Collection 5, but I haven't really used V Collection almost at all this year, which is super sad. I'm not a finger drummer myself, but I do like to trigger things from a pad just for the hell of it. I use Mega Sequencer Baby inside of Reaper for this sort of thing. Everything She Wants. I mean, it was used on countless records for sure. It depends, Blade Runner. I mean, I'm an industrial musician, and for me, the LinnDrum was used by so many of those bands and gives that incredible sound. It also was used just to replace, like, a lot of people don't think about a lot of classic music from the 80s. Rock bands used the LinnDrum. Like Queen, when you're listening to Queen, you're not hearing the actual drum sound mostly. You're mostly hearing the drum machine. And so if you love that classic rock sound, honestly, it's that sound too. The link is in the description of this video. If someone else wants to post it, that would be super cool. But yeah, it's literally in the description of this video. And an interesting thing here is you could see that we actually have two controls for the kick drum, but I could also turn velocity control on, and now from one, I've got control of that with velocity, which is obviously something the original unit didn't have. But what's interesting is if I'm on the pad for bass 1, it never goes beyond the velocity range. Like the max of bass 1 is not as much as the max of bass 2. Subtle, but it's there. I'm sure Depeche Mode used it. I'm sure everybody there. Rob, I don't know that I have a favorite preset yet, although I did like the Lost demo tape. I felt like this one's really cool. For me, this sound, I need to get into the beer now. It's time to start drinking hard. For me, this sound is like what I really want from something like a LinnDrum clone, is not just the raw samples, right? But something that takes me into that place. They're even using a phaser here, right? To give us a little bit of a little more nostalgia than the instrument actually sounded like. I can tell you from buying vintage analog synthesizers that a lot of times when you actually play them, they're way more in tune than people will make it seem. People make it seem like when you listen to like the new 80s, like synth wave sound, it is so warbly and out of tune. But most of these synthesizers are actually pretty rigidly in tune. And then there's also the like warmth and everything. And of course, I love the sound of vintage synthesizers. It would be crazy for me to say I don't. But the truth is, even by the time you get to the mixing phase, you still got to sort of massage that nostalgia into it, because a lot of these sound really bright. They can get pretty shrieky. They have a lot of weight and, you know, warmth to the oscillators, but they're still capable of some pretty like clean, bright sounds. So anyways, that, not to go off on that, to me, this is like the perfect preset. Thank you very much for posting it, Aquatic. It's a very good one. Let me just pull up see if there's any other good ones that I should check out real quick. Here's You Don't Want Me, which I'm assuming is Don't You Want Me, Baby. It's probably stretching this to the tempo I'm in right now too, so let's check out a few more. This one, The Machine's Dreams Are Made Of, is good too. This one, Topology, is really interesting because it almost has that sort of 808 sound. Let's, there's one called Drum and Bass. I want to check this one out. Yeah, obviously I'm playing this too slow, so why don't I speed this up a little bit? So to Blade Runner's comment, this is only useful for, you know, an 80s cover band. I don't think so. I mean, immediately you can see how far you can push this to sound really modern and aggressive. Or all the way back to the 80s. Or even something that sounds more like the 60s if they had LinnDrums around back then. Yeah, Disco DSP takes a lot of flack, that's for sure, Machine Storm. Discovery was cool, but it wasn't really my thing. I didn't know Zills was coming out with a CS80. God, I need to do a comparison video of my CS70M versus all the CS80 clones, but there's just so many of them, and also I don't really care. Like, I know that would be like a brutal video to record, so. I love the Yacht Rock studio kit, so this is definitely shout outs to Brando. I need to get that for G-Man, the Yacht Rock group in my area. So I'm going to loop my drums from before here and just go to an init patch so we can really oh my God, there were so many more. I didn't even notice there's all of these up here. I want to sounds like. That is very dirty. Let's just go to the init patch so we can actually go through what everything does. So of course you could trigger everything from down here. This is all latched together. The original LinnDrum was essentially the first digital drum machine. I'm sure someone did something digital that kind of sounded like drums maybe before, but essentially what we think of as a drum machine started with the LinnDrum, the digital drum machine, using actual samples, and they were really low fidelity samples, 8-bit, and even though they did have that dark, lower fidelity sound, they were used on countless records. It's just so awesome sounding stuff without going on too much. But they had to make a lot of decisions on how they were going to use memory space because it was so expensive back then. For what it's worth, this crash is longer than the 909's crash sound, I want to say, but it's still kind of that thing where it closes a little early. Unfaithful Journey says, I use the LinnDrum kick sound on most of my tracks, so definitely not just for a cover band, for sure. Aquatic asks, are there many people who are listening to music back in the 80s? I'd actually love to know. I want to drop that in the... Oh, I don't think I have the chat open. Oh, yeah, I could do this right here. Let's start a poll. I'm just curious. Were you listening to music in the 80s? I'm just curious, like, what the ratio of people here were doing that. Yeah, Simmons SES7, was that digital before this? I don't know. I mean, it certainly didn't have a layout like this, but it might have been before the original. The LM2, which is the one that's most famously used, was 82. I don't remember when the LM1 came out, but what I can say is I believe the LM1 was used by Vangelis on the Blade Runner soundtrack. So if you want that Blade Runner sound, you're going to need LM1, which isn't really the name of it. Everybody calls it the LM1, but I don't believe, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the LM2 isn't really the name. I forget what it is. You can look on Wikipedia, they explain it. So anyways, let's jump through some of these sounds real quick. So I think the clap is really iconic and a big part of what we love from this. And so we have a lot more. So let's just go through all of the sounds. So we've got the LM2s and the LM1s here. LM2A, B. I'll just go through them without narrating so you can hear them. I felt the LM2 class is the most like modern sounding one, but the LM2A sounds good. They really all sound good. Moving on to the snare. That's the side stick snare. We put velocity on just to make it easier. LM1 1980. LinnDrum, which that's what it is. So people call it the LM2. Even Behringer's calling their new clone the LM-Drum. But really, it's just a LinnDrum. It's not the LM2 from 1982. And Simmons SDS7 was 83. Okay. Ooh, that has like a nice snap to it. It's a little quieter, but tape sounds so good, so crunchy. And I'm going to just go end that poll here. Wow, 96% of you were listening to music in the 80s. I was expecting more of the crowd to be a little bit younger, like too young to have been listening back then, but I guess not. Okay, and another huge thing here. Let's pull up just the standard one. Sounds great, right? But what's so critical to the sound of all 80s PCM-based drum machines or digital drum machines is the ability to pitch the drum. So we could go up. Right? So that's a kind of a sound, but it's really when you start going downhill that we start getting the real juicy goodness. This is where we're getting into the 9 Inch Nails sort of territory, which is a little crazy. So why don't we bring the decay down? And we have a lot of low end rumble. So we can just turn the high pass filter. If we're going to the right, we engage a high pass filter. To the left, it's low pass. Which just sounds great. Let's pitch the kick drum down too. It's funny for DeCarmick to say the LinnDrum UI looks very Electron-like, because I think it's kind of the other way around. Of course, we've got control of the panning left and right, so, you know, for those of you guys wearing headphones. Again, I was listening to Celebration by Front 242, really awesome, raw-sounding EBM record from the Belgian band Front 242 from 1982 today when I was on my 10-mile run. And they panned their 808 drums hard left and hard right. So the snare's coming out of the right headphone and the kick drum's coming out of the left. It was fucking wild. So going back to neutral here, and we can reset everything just by double clicking. So what are some other sounds we have? We have the toms, which really have, looking at the hi-hats real quick though, or let's do the side tick here, side stick. Ooh, LM1 has a really characteristic sound. Let's pitch that around and see what it sounds like. Just incredible grit. Looking at the hi-hats, we can change these. Mono sounds more like it's compressed to me. Class, I'm wondering if that's like Class A preamp or something where it's got a little bit more of that brightness, and then tape obviously is more distorted. So if we just set all of these, let's reset the pitch and all of that, and just load up just like LM1 tape real quick. I think we might actually get a really cool sound in the sense that this is just like if you took an LM1 and ran it into tape with some pretty good heat. Really has a really cool sound to it, and you could do a whole thing just with. And as we increase the compressor, I mean. Yeah, just so again, just using the compressor and those tape-based samples, you're already catching a vibe, right? Versus, so we got a major difference in the toms. And then with tape, if you wanted to have like some smack to it, or mod, I'm interested what the processing on mod is. I'm sure it says in the manual. Check out these different cabasses. Very classic cabasa sound. I mean, I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Didn't mean to hit that. We got a tambourine. LM1, LM2. Everybody loves a conga. Kind of a more bright, characterful sound from the LM1 as well. So a huge part of the sound of the LinnDrum was the claps. So let's spend some time here. So much smack on Mod. Oh, there she is. Ooh, that fucking slaps. LM1 Mod sounds so good. So let's mute everything but the kick and the... Here we go. Let's just mute all the things. The kick and the clap. And I want to play around with the tuning and kind of get that where I want it to be. Really, the LM1, just the depth of that is crazy. Compressor's off, by the way. I have the mix all the way down. You're not hearing this with any effects. This is just raw. That clap sounds so good. If we go much lower than 5, we're starting to get into slop territory, but we still got some wet salmon to the face sort of feeling to this clap here. All right, let's unmute the snare and fuck around and find out with that. I kind of like the slightly hollow sound of the Mod. Okay, so I've got this side stick here. Let's see which we prefer. That one's good. Let's try LM2. The LM1's where it's at. So let's bring in some delay. So we have kind of two separate levels here. We got the level up here. This is your overall return level, and this is your send. So let's just crank it all the way up and control that level with the delay over here. That's very cool. Do you have external LFOs to easily map to give these patterns some movement? We do in Reaper, certainly. So in Reaper, I could just go to parameter here and then trap parameter modulation link, and then we could just create an LFO immediately and control any parameter. Like right now, you can see it's moving my last parameter here. So, you know, we could do the same type of thing. Let's increase the snare or the kick drum just for the fuck of it. So you can hear what that sounds like. But within the actual plugin, I don't think so. I don't think there's any like overt, and we can always turn these things off too by hitting the LEDs here, just if you want to save on CPU, right? But I don't think there's any modulation in here at all. It's actually a very simple sort of layout. There's no sequencer. I'm not aware of any modulation. I could, of course, be wrong. There could be like a hidden menu or something I'm not noticing, but it looks like, hey, we got high pass and low pass, pitch, decay, left, right, reverb, delay. You know, I think some of the coolness comes from in here where we've got distortion, filter, compressor, EQ, Bitcrusher, gate, phaser. But, you know, aside from that, it's about what we're getting. You know, it's not for, it's a good thing for $30. If this plugin cost, you know, 50 or $100, which I think the price will be going up soon, that gets a little, you know, that could be a little bit interesting around there. I don't think this has multiple outs. Let me just try loading a new one right now and just see if we have here the IconDrum. It does have multiple outs. Just so let's clear that up, because when Oberheim DMX came out, people were like, hated that it didn't have the outputs. This one has 30 outs. So you even have like the delay and reverb here. So you guys know. I'm not going to do that now, and I'm going to get rid of that. That was just to show that it does have the multiple outs that Oberheim DMX didn't have when it started. John Land says, we ran the Linn snare through an NS10 speakers placed on a live snare and recorded that once. Desperate for new sounds. So, I'm sorry. So is that actually how that, which of the sounds is that? Because I've heard that, isn't there a, what song am I thinking of where they did something similar like that, just to come up with a new sound, right? Rocket asks, I wonder though if this would cause phasing issues though with all this tweaking. No, I don't think so. There's really not going to be any phase issues unless you have some sort of parallel EQ. So if you had EQ here, you'll notice there is no like mix knob. But if you do, I mean, I can demonstrate it real quick actually. So let's just get this pattern going again. This is what this sounds like. If I just load a plugin here, so I'm going to load just a standard EQ plugin, right? Let's say I was to create like a pretty crazy boost, right? Now, if I bring the here, I could show you the phase. See how that's creating that phase shift as I move? So that's giving you an idea of what's going on with phase. And now, if I have it at 50%, we're going to get some phase cancellation around that frequency. That's 100% wet, right? Like this. If we bring it down to 50% or even less, probably to volume match it, you'll be able to hear that frequency sort of have some weird shit happen to it. A little bit of hollowness in there versus, and that is why you don't really need to worry about phase all that much, because even in that extreme example, not much was happening. I think the only time phase really comes into issues is like using high pass filters in parallel would be like kind of the example that you could hypothetically be like, ooh, there's a little bit of phase cancellation, I'm missing that. Yeah, it is on sale. $30, 25 euro or 25 pounds, I think. So anyways, let's jump back. Let's get that delay out of there. Let's put it on the snare. So we got control of the feedback if we want to go crazy with it. And then we have a high pass filter. Just to really help clean it up, because without that high pass filter, it's just too much low end. We have got control of each side. We can turn sync on and off if we just want to use like milliseconds. So like 300 and 500, will give us more of like a tape echo sound because those are settings on my Roland RE501. Bring it in. So we get all sorts of interesting rhythmic stuff with the delay. Let's check out the reverb on, let's just, again, using the snare and side stick only, just so we can hear it. We have a bunch of presets. I think it's the same presets they use in all of their plugins, basically 5 presets, and it just moves these knobs around. Really cool. So let's crank the reverb up a bit. Oh, I need to turn it up actually from, I turned the delay up but not the reverb. So this is like an ambient setting if you just want to add a little bit of room, like drum room sound to it. I've criticized in the past the reverb GeForce uses because it's really good. And with vintage plugins, I actually kind of want them to sound a little grimy, like a little gritty. And I've said, and I'd still like it if there was a vintage knob for the reverb where we could take it from sounding really nice and almost like a modern Big Sky sort of sound and take it all the way down into like, what if we just had like a fucking mini verb, or what is it, micro verb from Alesis? Like, what if we had just the cheapest reverb from the 80s? However, on drums, this is where you really don't want it to sound like that, because drums as a source for reverb, that will get across. If a reverb sounds metallic at all or ringy, or you hear the individual echoes, there's not enough diffusion, things like that, you're going to hear it in with a drum sound more. So I really appreciate the sound here. Let's just go through the presets. So now we're getting into like presets 4 and 5 are like the giant verbs. See what I mean? Actually, on 5, you can kind of hear those discrete echoes a little more. Sounds very good there. Size, decay, filter level, all at about 50%. When we take it to 5, we increase it a bit. I don't know if that's a different algorithm. Yeah, I think it is, because maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think it is different algorithms. If it's not, that's funny, because you could get quite different sounds out of it. But yeah, I mean, if we want to take it really big, we certainly can. I think I like algorithm 4, if that is a different algorithm. You could definitely get good settings. It seems like on the extremes, you get, it highlights the sort of echoing nature of all reverb algorithms. Like, that sounds great for like a huge sort of sound, and then you just bring the decay or size down if you want to use it only for like a gated snare reverb. There we go. I mean, using a setting like that, you really kind of get more of a gated sound. So, also very cool. We can just turn the reverb off there. Let's check out all of the effects we have here. So, let's look at the EQ first. I'm going to turn the reverb back on. I want to see if the EQ is affecting the reverb or if it's a separate thing. It sounds like it's processing the reverb and delay as well, which is cool. But that's the thing. If we kick air on, I think it's just changing the frequency. So we're going up closer into those like 5K frequencies, whereas without it, there's definitely a little bit more 2K-ish frequency in that high end. Let's check out the mids. I mean, the mids are almost like a 500 low mid. Which is kind of useful because, you know, not so much I'm boosting it, although it is with a subtle amount, like say a decibel, it's going to add some warmth. So this is the mastering engineer in me. So here's the sound without it, and then I'll kick it on halfway through. I actually kind of like it with a little bit more warmth in there. Just turn the distortion compressor off. You're not hearing them because the mix is off, but it's there. I actually kind of like it. Let's crank the low end. If we need the thickness, BG's Staying Alive used the LinnDrum. That's pretty crazy. Staying alive. Sub. I'm assuming that's going to just lower the EQ shelf. So this is, when we put it on sub, we're just getting the lowest frequencies, and actually be interested in pulling them out, seeing how it sounds. It's interesting, by pulling out those frequencies, in this case, it's actually not changing the sound too much, which I appreciate. So I actually think for me, a lot of the times, I might actually pull the low end out to tighten up that low end. Oh, you can change the order. What's the trick to that? I mean, can you drag it around? Or, I mean, I know we could like just load the EQ over here, let's say. We could load, I guess that's how you change it. So if I move this over here, it flips and, okay, so that's cool. But I like the idea of, okay, so I always recommend EQing into compression and distortion, not the other way around. Slaying Alive with 90s era FLA guitar samples, frontline assembly samples. So the EQ is actually pretty good. Let's add a little air. So we've added like a decibel, and then pulling out 6 is a lot, but it actually, I think, cleans it up a bit. I like having the bass, you know, the sub bass of an instrument in that low range. Let me see what I've got. Let's see. Monitor input? Is this, I don't know why I'm not hearing my, oh, I see why. Moog source sample here. And I want it to be filling up that low end space, you know? I guess it's like 80's or something like that. Let's turn sync off. Don't need much of that. Right, and of course without the delay and reverb. Not as exciting, is it? And without the EQ. It's funny that I, kicking the EQ on and off, you don't really hear that much of a difference, but that's because again, the mastering engineer in me is like adjusting things by little bits, not going crazy. Let's check out the EQ now. I'll turn the bass back off for the moment. Although it would be interesting to hear it with it on and off. So we've just got mix and drive, and that's it. So with the drive all the way off, there is a sound. The first thing I notice is it sounds band limited. It sounds like it's a digital, like it puts it into that 80's digital drum machine space. And even at 23.7, it's crazy. And now let's EQ into that. That is rocking my headphones. Yeah, it's weird. The mid is almost like a low end band. It would be like a bell. And then we can pull the mix back, so we can leave that crazy distortion in, but just mix it in slightly. Potential phase in there, though, because there's so much going on, and it does sound like there might be an EQ cut. Yeah, like 13, it sounds a little phasey. With the bass. I like the distortion. I kind of wish there was a tone knob or something in there, and it didn't have... The biggest thing about it for me is if we kind of go back to our setting we had before we were listening to it, I don't love that even with the drive off, we get such an EQ difference. So again, without it... With it on... Right, there's just like some aliasing in there. I'm glad you like it, Rob. It's pretty cool. This wouldn't be my go-to distortion for this. I would probably just use another distortion plugin, because this, to me, I don't know what's going on with it. If someone could explain it to me, like what's going on with this. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, vintage distortions do have a much more of a tendency of having like a darker sound to them than digital distortions, right? So appreciate it. It's got the flavor, but I actually think it's kind of difficult to find where I would, you know, for certain kinds of sounds you can get something, but I kind of feel like you have to use the EQ and distortion in tandem. I think when you're listening to it with the in the mix, or even just with the bass line there, it's kind of useful to make a judgment call to say that the distortion's just a little much, which is saying a lot coming from an industrial musician to be like it's a little much, but I don't know that I'm having a stroke. I don't know what I would use it for. Let's check out the filter. It does what you think it would, right? This would be a great knob to, you know, parameter modulate with an LFO. So let's go ahead and LFO it. I don't know. It's a fun thing. So it's doing something. The compressor. Here's where it's at. This is what you buy this plugin for. So some of y'all like Rob who've already bought it before we got here, I'd say skip the distortion. I think that needs some work. There's other better ways to distort things. Probably distort things on the individual channels too. I'd still prefer the sound of something like Sound Toys. What the fuck is it called? Devilock, the emulation of the Shure Levelock. That's a really good compressor if you want some extreme distortion that doesn't fall apart the way this one does as much. So check out the compressor. We have to increase we have to turn it on. That would help. Compression all the way down. You'll notice nothing's happening with these LEDs, so we're not hitting that. So as we increase the threshold, it's adjusting the threshold and the makeup gain at the same time. So I don't know if we're getting, 4 decibels of gain reduction. That's what that means or what it means, but we're getting some amount. And slower release is going to kind of bring the transients forward and everything else a little further back. Medium's probably fine. Let's increase the compression further. Now, see, what's interesting is we're getting distortion from the compressor. It's like a very characterful vintage compressor sort of sound, and we're at 65% here, and it is pushing the distortion. So this is if you want a distorted drum sound, I'm going to be honest with you, probably just use the compressor. I'm glad you do, David Smith. I'm doing my best here to, show these instruments off, whether it's hardware, software, modern, or vintage. I just want people to experience them. I'm not trying to create gear acquisition syndrome in anybody, but I do think GeForce delivers an awesome product every time. So honestly, to me, this is giving, Devilock sort of sound. Let's play with the release. Yeah, so it's really like a distortion with the release fast. A nice slow setting is actually really good. This is super extreme. You probably wouldn't want to use it this way, but this would be good for that Daft Punk type sound. So a lot of people don't know that, like, actually you guys probably all know this, but for anybody who doesn't, you know, Daft Punk was famous for taking what's the 3030 compressor, like the DBX or whatever, and they would put their drums through it and get this sort of pumping sound. And then of course sidechaining is like a different version of that, where you use one signal to control the gain reduction of another compressor. But so this, even though this is super extreme, is giving that sort of Daft Punk type thing. And we can turn the delay down quite a bit because it's pulling that sound forward as it gets more and more squashed. It's interesting how it, Elisa's 3630, that's correct, John. The Dirty 30, or the Elisa's 36 Dirty. I don't know what it is called, but that's the slang for it. And you're really hearing the stereo-ness of that reverb, where we're really just hearing the reverb for the snare at this point. So there's a trick called New York compression. Let's pull this back. We're going to use the turn sub off, floor, reset our EQ, okay? Mix this all the way up, and we're going to get a crazy compressor sound. A little too much there. So that's like way over the top, right? Now, what we're going to do is push high and low end into that. So let's crank the high end. Are you starting to get that little Daft Punk feeling, right? Again, this isn't maybe the right drum pattern, not the right yada, 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 but, you know, here we go here. Now, yeah, Synsonic, it cuts off the high, the distortion for sure. But the low end's where it's going to matter. I'm going to leave sub off because I want to actually grab some low end, whereas sub is like super low. Maybe dial the compressor back a bit just because we pushed more level into it. So I'm going to bring the compressor back and try again. So you'll notice, like, if the release is too long, we basically lose the snare entirely, because what's happening is the front end of the kick occurs and then the compressor kicks in, kills the signal, and then slowly opens back up. And most of the content of the snare is behind the initial transient of the kick. So if we bring the release really fast, for instance, you could really hear that it becomes a distortion plugin, or part of a plugin. And now the real trick to New York compression is mixing, or putting it in parallel. So you're not going to get phase issues from parallel compression. You're going to get phase issues from parallel EQ. You have to be careful because distortion plugins can have EQ in them. So even though in theory they're just adding harmonics, those harmonics might The harmonics themselves shouldn't cause phase issues, but if there's any EQ hidden in the plugin, which there seems like there is in the distortion of this one, I wouldn't use it in parallel, or I would use it cautiously in parallel. There's no rules. But the real trick to this sound is the mix, because we've just destroyed the sound with this compressor, right? It's like way, 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 way over the top. But if we pull it back... Yo, John Lance, thank you so much for gifting 5 Vulture Culture memberships. That is awesome. And I appreciate you, especially giving in the holiday season. It's very kind of you to do that. So thank you. And I hope we get to see in the chat who got it. Swords and Synthesizers got it. Viva got it. Ryan Kassoon got it. Your dad got it. And Radsley Mudlark got it. If you guys haven't yet, make sure that you've got it set up on your YouTube channel to be able to receive gifted memberships. Unfortunately, I don't know how to explain it quickly, but that is a thing. And I really appreciate it, John. It's too kind of you. And yeah, for it's like $30 in USD. I think it's 25 pounds and conversion rate. But still, when you think of, I mean, just a compressor, right? Forget, I get it. It doesn't have a sequencer. It doesn't have modulation, whatever. $30, that compressor is where it's at. And there's something you're getting from this compressor you're not getting from anywhere else. So I'm going to leave the compressor pulled all the way back, and then I'm going to turn the bass back on. And what we're going to do is, make the judgment call from in the mix. So that's really given us some shit. And then if we get the low pass filter involved, right? Now we're going to get that Daft Punk thing. So, combination there, pretty crazy. Let's check out the other stuff real quick, just because we can. So I'm going to turn the EQ and compressor off because it's doing a lot. I'm glad it's giving you the rush, David, for sure. So Let's increase the mix here. I mean, this is going to give you the juice. So let's start with just the bits first. So as you reduce the bit rate, first you're going to hear noise come in. I'll toggle it on and off so you guys can really hear the difference there. What are we at, about 50%? Honestly, YouTube compression for these live streams is not the best, so you might not be able to hear the difference, but as we take it further, not only will you get the noise and that gets pushed further and further forward, you get more brittle noise, but then you also hear this gating effect, where if a signal goes below a certain level, it just disappears. And so you can get some really cool rhythmic stuff with just the bit rate without affecting the sample rate. So the extreme version of this, of course, is like where we've just completely annihilated it, right? But somewhere around like 9.5, we actually kind of have like a useful rhythmic layer. So if I pull that out, we're not going to get phasing issues with this because it's so extreme. We could just bring that in subtly, and that's going to give us kind of a cool, different sort of sound. Mark Rouse says, if each drum sample has individual volumes, would turn them down, would that make the distortion sounding better? Might be overdriving already before it gets to the distortion and even the compressor. That makes sense, Mark. Makes a lot of sense. I think even if we had just the kick drum, right? We could do this as an experiment. We go back to the distortion and we turn it on. Turn the Bitcrusher off. That's obviously going to change some things. I'll turn the bass off too here. If we bring it really low. Even if it's pretty quiet. Using that high end. Although you might be right, I can't tell if it's a trick of the ear, but it does sound like it's more noticeable. It seems more noticeable with that, with a lower volume. It doesn't seem to do as much, but you know, it is what it is. Back to the Bitcrusher. Is OBX the best GeForce plugin? Man, it's hard to say what the best one is. I think my fave is OB1, actually, because it's so raw, so analog sounding, so characterful. But I'm a weird dude when it comes to what I'm looking for out of a plugin. I want it to remind me of the quirky warmth and analog nature of some of the machines behind me, which will inherently take it away from being useful in every situation. I mean, OB1 is not useful in every situation, or let me say it this way. There might be a better GeForce plugin to use for certain types of sounds that OB1's not going to like specialize at. The filter's very characterful. But if you were to, you know, if you lined up 5 plugins in the town square and a fucking Nazi with a revolver put a gun, and it's like, okay, you got to pick one plugin, one synth plugin I'm going to kill the other for. I'm the type of fucker who's going to pick the plugin that has the most characterful filter. Like the most odd analog sounding, gritty, unpredictable, like kind of wonky sort of, you know, probably squelchy, high resonance filter. I'm probably going to pick that one, and they're going to blow Omnisphere's brains out right in front of me just because it's going to be like, because the more a plugin can do, but on the other hand, to get my point across, I still I still think Omnisphere's the way to go if you're going to buy one plugin. Like if you just want one plugin and no more, Omnisphere's the way because it's going to do everything. It's just not going to do the quirky analog thing as well as OB1 or even OBX or OBE. OBE is pretty crazy, like what that plugin can sound like. But I think OBX is really good too. It's hard to say. OBX is probably the one most people should buy. Let me put it that way, because it seems like it's the right balance of like everything you could want. It's got the Oberheim magic. The filter sounds great. It sounds analog, but like not as wonky as OB1. But I'm gonna go with that. So okay. So I don't know if I missed anything in the chat here. I got a little off on a track there. So back to what I was doing, the bit crusher. If we increase the bits now, we can also get kind of cool sounds like that. That has like a cool little rhythmic element, and then if we get the other layers in, it might get too crazy. It sort of just becomes like a wall of noise. So let's check out sample rate with the bits all the way up so we can hear what that does individually. Something I want you to notice about this bit crusher versus probably the stock bit crusher in your DAW, or even if you have a hardware bit crusher, this is a very well optimized bit crusher. And what I mean by that is that normally when you bit crush something, you get a really harsh aliasing frequency around Nyquist. So you're going to get this like screaming sound because essentially every single frequency that's hitting that upper sample rate is just getting obliterated, and you get this like very specific sound. If you want a good example of what it sounds like, listen to, what is it, Edge by Rez. That bass line is like the best example of what this sound is supposed to sound like. Here though, there's some filtering going on or something going on that's making it very smooth and musical. It's affecting the tone, but it's also kind of a low pass. I think Aldi is a very good example of, I would say Cherry Audio is like Aldi. I love Aldi. It's where I do my shopping. But for instance, I got a loaf of bread from Aldi last week, and it, because of their model, the things are not always as fresh. They just get it in when they get it. Sometimes they don't have what you want. And so this bread went like moldy really fast. So I was like, fuck, I can't really buy bread from Aldi. So it's in a weird way, that's kind of like Cherry Audio, where it's like, they're awesome and they're putting it out at a price people can afford. So is GeForce. $30. I mean, at what point have we gotten so spoiled? Like, what do you want this? You want this for fucking $10? Like, come on. This is a company of real people who, how are they going to pay their bills if their plugins are $10, right? Let me tell you, as a person who sells $10 plugins, my bills ain't paid. You got to be able to move some numbers even at $30, right? Cherry Audio, GeForce doing a great job. For me, GeForce always delivers. I'll be very vocal about what I think could be improved on their plugins. I always have a couple of things, but it never takes away from me being able to like give a full-throated endorsement for what GeForce does. Cherry Audio, I think, is really great, but when we've done the comparisons with the hardware, whether it's the Sequential Circuits Prophet behind me, or like the Polyvox, or even comparing GeForce's SEM to Arturia's SEM, GeForce takes the edge there. And where the price is similar, I think GeForce is an obvious choice. I think sometimes GeForce is selling something for quite a bit more than Cherry Audio, and then it's up in the air, because you got to talk about these things with relative perspective to the price. And we were checking out Thing 8 from Acoustica Audio last week, and it's a cool plugin, but I don't think it's a $200 plugin. I don't think it's a $120 plugin, which is what they're selling it for, like 120, 129, something like that. For me, it's very good. I kind of took a lot of heat in the comments, which always happens when I have a little bit more, when I have a less than glowing review, but there was some stuff about it that I was like, this ain't, you know, I felt almost guilty for criticizing GeForce's Reverb for sounding so good when I was listening to Acoustica Audios, because that reverb did not sound good, and not in a good vintagey, warm, crunchy, glowy sort of way, but in like just like, what is this? How did this make it into this plugin? And why is it so expensive? You know, not that there aren't really great. There are plugins, again, Omnisphere would be one of them. I'd be happy to pay $500 for, and I'll recommend it to everybody. I understand not everybody has $500 to spend on a plugin, but if you do, you're not going to be, I stand behind you, will not be disappointed. I'm sure someone's disappointed by Omnisphere out there, but for me, it's great. But anyway, so on the discussion, I think GeForce is putting out an incredible product at an incredible price. And yeah, music companies need to make a living. To echo what Aquatic said, they got to charge something. I don't like the implication by some people on the internet that synth companies that charge crazy amounts of money for some of their stuff, or large sums, I shouldn't say crazy, but let's say large sums. The thing is, innovation is a big part of what's going on at companies that charge more. GeForce Software has set the standard for analog plugins now. And I do not think that innovation came cheaply, right? So they've paid the price. They had to actually push the whole world forward, right? Because now if you want to put out a plugin and it doesn't sound as good as GeForce, you ain't going to sell that much, right? And their plugins, I think, are very reasonably priced for what you get. But even still, it's like, do I think GeForce should sell their plugins for less? I wouldn't say so. Are there some companies that we've checked out on this channel, maybe last week, that I think should sell their plugins for yes? Absolutely. So anyways, I don't mean to get off on a rant there. Back to the Bitcrusher. It sounds really good. And probably the magic is when you're using a little bit of both, right? So using like this darker bit crushed and sample rate broken up sound. That's giving this really beautiful sort of sound. Now, if we swap it with the EQ, right? So if I go to Bitcrusher here, and then I swap this with the EQ, right? So now I've got Bitcrusher into EQ into compressor. I suppose we could swap this with the EQ. So we go EQ, Bitcrusher, compressor. I don't know which one I'd prefer. So let's check that out, just the two here. I like the EQ first. It kind of has a more musical sound. Into the compressor. With the bass. I'm just addicted to the sound of like a pushed compressor, right? And I think when it comes to mixing, a lot of people are very afraid of compressors. Here's the cheat code. I'm going to give you the real quick, and this is sort of like an Andrew Sheps, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Worked with Red Hot Chili Peppers, so many bands that Rick Rubin produced. Here's the cheat code that you can kind of take from compressors. Don't think of a compressor as a mixing tool, because it can be that. You sort of need that. Obviously, if my microphone didn't have a compressor on it, it would sound different. Might sound a little less professional. But the first way to get into compressors, if you're just a synth person, you don't know anything about mixing, you just want to like kind of get started with it. Get a compressor that has a mix amount, and then crank the compression till it's too far. Right? In this case, you would never use this much compression on a regular sort of situation. Take it too far, and then just the only control to worry about, the mix knob, right? So just threshold, or in this case it says compress, and the mix knob. You can fuck around with the release if you want, fuck around with the attack, but basically set the attack and release to just standard settings, whatever it comes to. A lot of the times it'll be kind of a fast attack and a medium release. That's probably a good starting point for most compressors. Or slow the attack down if you want more of the thwack of the drum. But really the trick is just simplify the shit out of it and just use the threshold and the mix amount and get it to where you're like, okay, it's kind of, take it too far, but to where it sounds super cool, and then pull the mix back. And now you have a control of like how much of that dry, kind of more full transient sound you have versus the almost distorted, in this case certainly distorted, but like super pushed compressor sound you want. Mixing that in kind of back, right? So in this case 50% sounds really cool, but let's just turn the volume up. So that's the sound of just the IconDrum on its own, and then it's just slowly So now I'm using, 14%, right? 15% here. And that's like a much more, if I was trying to actually mix this for a record, that's how I would do it. If it wasn't my record's going to be like... My record's going to be insane, but if I was mixing it for a client, 15%, right? That's going to be that sweet spot of we've pulled some crunchy sustain into the sounds, but we've still got the transients. Because of course, if we take it all the way, it's a cool sound, but we've really lost everything except for the very front end of those transients. It sounds cool, but really going back to a more subtle amount and cranking the volume. Yeah, so really good sort of setup here. Let's set this to compressor, and let's pull up, what else do we have? We got a gate, which is actually super interesting. I would love to see if you could like run this gate just to the reverb, right? That would make a lot of sense, because this is the Phil Collins trick of getting like a really huge reverb, but only being able to hear the beginning of it. That's where we get the phrase gated reverb from. So you get this huge stadium sound, and then it's just like, and then it cuts, right? So, right? So that, you like my reverb mouth noise? So let's hear how this sounds. But so you can hear how this like chops it up. This is your release time, I'm assuming. So if we tighten this like really tight, 30 milliseconds, that's barely enough time to like smooth it out. We'll really hear probably some choppiness. I absolutely have to do that, Widow. And Swords and Synthesizers, yes, I do not recommend buying gear if you don't have the cash. I think it's really great if you could try to save money first and then buy gear. But if you have to buy the gear, just try to get the cash ahead of time. Things like get it in 4 payments or whatever. That's financial slavery, in my opinion. I'll get off my soapbox, but yeah. So this is kind of crazy, right? If we take the, we can control the ratio too. That's really great. So let's take it extreme. You can hear it clicking a little at the end, but that almost reminds me of like the Kwai R50E, like that heavy gated sound, right? We need a little more time. So this is very cool for if you want to get that really chopped up sound. The only thing for me is it does feel like that should be on, we should be able to route that to the reverb in particular. We don't have any like setting for that, do we? Nah. It's just, that would be, if I had to, honestly, everything, and you know, I'm going to give my criticism about the distortion being a little bit weird for me, but I don't think they really need to change that. I'm a weird guy. It's fine. It's doing what they want it to do. I would ask GeForce to figure out a way to have the reverb be able to be gated. Like if we have a gate here, it just feels like it's crying out for a gated reverb sound. And that is currently something we can't do that I'm aware of. And it just seems like maybe we could put one little button, like the way we have these buttons, sub and air. How about just like one button that says snare and maybe clap? I don't know. Maybe if you press it a couple of times, it's like, it could be just the snare or just the snare and the clap or just the snare and the side stick or, you know, something like that. Because that is the 80s sound, and that is the way so many drum sounds from the 80s were made, was taking a LinnDrum snare and cranking the shit out of some ultra bright reverb, but then gating it also. So it sounds cool. Mix knob wouldn't be the end of the world, but I guess that's the ratio. So let me see if I turn it down. I mean, Mixmaster, who am I to tell you how to spend your money? But here's what I would say. You're talking about what's the wave? $600? Something like $600? You're going to pay the $600. And my question would be, why not just make the $600 so you know you have it and you don't have that hanging over your head? And then, because I'd ask you this. Do you think you're going to make $600 extra this month to be able to pay that off? I'm sorry, $600 over the course of 6 months to pay that off? Probably, right? Well, you're not going to get the Behringer wave in about 6 months, right? Tim Schubridge just posted about this. It's not coming out till like a lot of the, I think, was it Sweetwater or someone was saying like July? So you're not going to get it either way. Why not just make that money and then make the purchase then? I guess maybe if like there's different, if you get in early on the pre-order, there might be something to that. I don't know. Aquatic Borealis, you recently were trying to get a Moog Muse. Maybe there is something to it. But for me anyways, I generally think when it comes to questions of debt, here's my metaphor. And then I swear to God, I'll shut the fuck up about this. I'm sorry, Mixmaster. I'm not trying to pick on you. It's one of those things when people are like, just, throw it, interest-free payments. I get it. That's probably, if you can be sure you pay it off, there's really no sin there. But have you ever met someone who's convinced to tell you like, just eat this, I don't know, whatever delicate treat, like just eat some Oreos. It's no big deal. Or just eat some of this, some of that. It's not going to make you fat, right? It's not going to make you gain weight. And it's like, okay, you're right. Just every once in a while having some Oreos or having some cake or having some donuts, it's not going to make you gain any weight, right? And I hate to be using this metaphor because that word is charged. I'm not trying to make anybody feel a certain way. But the thing is, it's like the type of person who's more likely to say, I'm okay right now, unless it's like, Christmas dinner or something like that, which is coming up. I say Christmas because that's what I celebrate, but whatever holiday you celebrate. Do you see my point here? The type of person who, they're probably not going to have to worry about their weight. Whereas the person who does say yes frequently, they might have to worry about it. And so, and again, all bodies are beautiful. I'm not saying it like that, but just as a metaphor, right? That's my thing about any form of debt, where it's like, okay, yeah, there, one time, no real sin. But the type of person who jumps on that more often, I would probably bet will have some struggles with credit card debt at some point. Not talking about you, Mixmaster. I'm just saying in general, that's why I don't even like going near it. Just have the money or make the money and then good to go. But I do understand if there's some sort of pre-order reason for doing it. So that's my, let's jump into this phaser and check this out now. So this is interesting. They have a sync button here, so we can turn that on and off. Mixmaster says, just can't eat the whole cake or eat cake all day, every day. And for what it's worth, I'm sure I've had a day of my life where I ate cake all day, every day. So I'm not trying to sound holier than thou. I have a tendency, especially because of my authoritative voice, to sort of sound that way, but I'm not saying it. I'm sure I've eaten some things that would truly disgust every viewer of this channel. But I'm just trying to make a metaphor there, so... What scares me is this boost knob here. Like, you need more than this? Wow. That actually sounds really good. For that kind of resonance... So I have, right over here, I've got a vintage Boss analog phaser pedal from the 80s. And I have to say, and this might be the first time in my life ever saying this type of thing, I think the phaser in this plugin sounds better than this analog phaser, because this thing does have like a really boosted sound, but I don't know if it's got so many poles or what that's causing it, but it's like shrieky in not the most musical way for me, unfortunately. You guys have heard it on the stream before, those of you guys who've been watching for a couple of years. And the phaser here, the clarity of the filter, this again kind of goes to what I was saying earlier about GeForce. Like, they've figured some dark arts out when it comes to filters, and we're hearing it here with this phaser. The resonant peak of this filter boosted. Now, for me, I would never use it with the depth and the boost on and the mix all the way up like this. It's too crazy. But just listening to that resonant peak, it is very sweet. So, very extreme. We'll turn the boost off for a second and just play with the rate real quick. I would be happy to pay the price of one IconDrum for that pistachio chocolate cake. Mixmaster, it sounds awesome. So one little thing you could say, we can go up to 1 hertz here. I feel like some phasers go faster than that. So depending on what you're trying to do with a phaser. Now for me, I like, same thing with chorus. I don't like particularly fast, wiggly, vibrato-y choruses or phasers, but in the interest of, giving you guys the full range of, what little I know about this gear is that I do think something like that could push it further. I also have I've got a couple of these Electro Harmonics small stones, right? So very famous phaser from the 70s. And again, it's vintage. So I can just say, there's more, you could get more wiggly with it. You could get more wah, 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 with it, with some of that hardware, but I wouldn't use it that way. I don't really see the point of having a vibrating drum machine, but this is probably a very useful range here from like, 0.2 to 0.5. Now, if we use subtle amounts of it instead of just going crazy. Doing something like this, it's going to take it a little bit more. It's not quite like having a mod matrix, but when Dubstation was asking about what kind of way can we get some movement in the sound, I actually think the phaser is probably the best way, with some depth all the way up, boost off, because the boost does some shit and the mix not crazy, right? So what are we at, 37%? I'm actually surprised at that much, but let's try it in front of the compressor. So yeah, you could see, I think I was at like close to 40%. Now I'm close to 20% because pushing it into the compressor is just going to pull everything forward except the loudest elements, which in this case would certainly be the kick drum and then the snare. And so the phaser around there sounds really good. What does effects return do here? I could look it up in the manual real quick, but it's doing something to the effects returns over here, but I'm not sure what. I don't know if it's like attenuating the delay and reverb volumes at the same time as you crank this or not. So, hey, take care. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Rob, good to see you here. Happy holidays to everybody, by the way. So I think we've covered the sounds, we've covered the effects. I actually am quite impressed by this effects section. It is kind of calling out for like one more thing right up here, but then maybe it would be kind of throwing. Maybe you need this long line for it to look like a LinnDrum. I don't know if that's up for you guys to say. I'm curious. I want to ask one more. I'm going to ask a poll. Will you buy IconDrum? And I want to add some options here. So we got yes, no, yes, we've got no, I prefer VeepROM, because that's like kind of the direct competition. No, I'm getting Behringer LinnDrum. No, I'm good with Linn samples. So I think those are some good options here. So to reiterate, we have you or will you buy IconDrum? Yes, being like you're going to buy it, or you would. I mean, you don't have to have bought it there. People are going to be like, you can download free LinnDrum samples and just process them in any other drum machine. You're not going to get all of the bells and whistles. The biggest thing is the pitch control isn't going to sound. If you just pitch a drum down in your DAW, or even if you have like a hardware sampler that doesn't do this entirely the same way, you're not going to get these grainy digital artifacts that you're going to get over here. VPROM, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the standard up to this point for emulating LinnDrum as well as other vintage drum machines. And I think it's around the same price point. I think it's like 39 euro, something like that. Some people, of course, are going to go for the Behringer hardware version. This costs less than a tenth of that at the time of recording, but I do understand that you can't always look at things in terms of VST price versus the hardware, because you could get a pretty good clone of a synth that costs 12 grand behind me for fucking free. It's not always the same. Is it going to sound like the CS70M? Maybe not, but there's some good stuff out there. So I'm going to give you guys like just 20 seconds more to respond. I got some votes in already, but I want to know what people think. And it's perfectly fine to be honest here, because even if I'm sure GeForce wants your feedback too. Honest feedback. We're not being cruel here, but we're just being real about, okay, so, a certain chunk. The poll is anonymous too, which is nice. So you're not like being mean, like you don't have to raise your hand and be like, in the class, no one's going to tattle on you for being honest and being like, no, I'm just happy with the LinnDrum samples I have, and I don't need to spend. I do understand an argument for basically any VST coming out. If you're like me and you've been buying VSTs for 15 years or so, you probably have so many you don't use. And so I understand being like, do I need another VST? Oberheim DMX by GeForce is going to be a similar sound. I think I even said in that live stream, I wish there was like the Linn version, because to me, I like the Oberheim DMX sound. Of course, it's iconic. It's classic. For me, it's a little more synth poppy. As an industrial EBM guy myself, IconDrum's more up my alley. So we'll call it there. And the results are, is it going to say, can I see somewhere, or is it just, I just like lose it? Is it, where do I have to look to see it in the chat? Let me see. Oh, here's the results. 57% of you guys said yes. 0% said I prefer VPROM, which is surprising. 0% of people in the live chat, which is super surprising, because my comments section on Oberheim DMX from GeForce was littered with VPROM true believers being like, you should just use that. It's already existed. Then 14% of you are going to go with the Behringer LinnDrum. And I would just ask, I'd be curious, is it the fact that you just want that hardware, or maybe for like a DAW-less live jam setup? Is that what it is? Is it primarily that? Is it that it's analog? So you do have analog filters in the new Behringer version. So there's something for that to be said for that. I'd be just curious, but again, I don't want to feel no compulsion to actually raise your hand in the chat and say, this is why I'm buying the Behringer version. But I just would be curious to hear, like, what's the biggest draw for you, so that I can understand you guys better too. And then 28% said they're just good with the LinnDrum samples that are free on the internet. And I understand that as well, because if I was to buy a new $30 plugin for every vintage drum machine that I love, I would spend easily $300, $400. So let's see. Mixmaster says, probably have more free drum samples than any other sound for sure. Yeah, Kieran says more synth pop. DMX was all over. Whoa, shit, that was loud. Let's see. I'm just catching up on chat here. I don't have a referral link. I would love to get a referral link from GeForce or a lot of the companies that I do these videos for. They don't pay me anything. That's why I can be very transparent with what I think, which I think is good for them too. But I also don't make anything. The only companies I get any kickback from are Filterverse and Museo. So if you guys want really great orchestral samples, check out Museo. I've done a video on that. And Filterverse is pretty awesome too, so worth checking out. Eternian says, I'm buying Obi-Wan, DMX, OBX, and Icon. So there you are, GeForce. I just sold a lot of products for you. Those are all really great. Analog filters, probs. George says, I use an MPC. I connect drum machines to a separate the sounds on the mixer. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? So, yeah. TrueTech says Behringer is known for exacting clones. I think they were. I think they're, in the last 2-3 years, they've put out a bunch of products that seem a little less concerned about it. But there was a time where I would have said basically all of their clones are pretty damn good with no real build quality issues that people in my comment section were talking about. Now it's different. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it might. I'm always afraid of like bias, right? So as my YouTube channel gets bigger, maybe it's just that. Maybe there's more people who will sound off because they don't like Behringer or something like that. I don't want to ever be putting out content, spreading it just for the elitism of not liking Behringer. But my concern is that I do have a very disproportionate number of comments from people saying, I bought this Behringer product and then it didn't work. We couldn't fix it, had to send it back, sort of a thing. So then I don't want to recommend stuff. But it does kind of seem a bit like case by case. Pro 800, they basically were able to fix the issues with it with firmware updates, aside from phantom encoders that some people get. But I guess that's just sort of like, you buy it, you see if all the encoders work. Hopefully they don't go bad over time, sort of a thing. There is a link to it in the description of the video, Sari, but it's not an affiliate link, so I don't get anything back for it. But still, you could click and use it just as a quick way to get to the IconDrum page on GeForce. BC340, is that the VP330 clone Aquatic? I think the Crave and the Edge are very cool, Nick. I think those are very good plugins that aren't, or plugins, hardware that is them doing. I guess they're still ripping someone off, but it doesn't seem as bad. Yeah, and I mean, I'm one of those people, I like some of the vintage synths from the 80s that feel a bit cheap. So I don't necessarily mind cheap feel if it sounds really good. Where I have issues is where Behringer's gotten the sound of some of these synths pretty wrong, which then makes me think, okay, so they're really cutting corners. Whereas like something like a Behringer monopoly, for instance, it sounds pretty much like my monopoly. I couldn't say in good faith that like it's worth spending. If you just care about the sound, go with the Behringer version because they seem like they're well built, and they sound pretty much identical to a monopoly. Little differences, nothing worth the $1,000 price gap or so. But that's one case. Something like Pro 800 UBXA, that's a different story. Certainly Pro VS, different story. So yeah. They've got the new Wave coming out too. So that'll be interesting to see what people say about that. George says, I have a lot of Behringer products, synths, drum machines, processors, mixers, pedals, speakers, no problem with them. Have you ever had any problems? It's also good when I hear people who say they don't have problems with things. That helps weigh out the, there is like a negativity bias in comments on videos. I understand that. Synth Sonic has a DeepMind 12, and for me, it's great. That's also another one of those synths, like DeepMind 12, Neutron, like really, that was for me when Behringer was like at their peak, where they're, DeepMind 12 started as a Juno clone, but really became its own thing, and is a cool synth. And it seems like they're all well built. So hopefully I hope everybody who buys a Behringer Wave or something, they get a great product, but we'll see what's up. I didn't know that about Lexicon coming after Behringer Reverb. I didn't read about that. Nick says, everyone was so hyped on the DeepMind, but that didn't last long when the Hydrasynth came out. Everyone was like, DeepMind what? Yeah, that's true. I think the DeepMind 12 is a really cool synth. I've got, anything I might have to say about Behringer is not applicable. I still got comments about people saying like, it felt cheap, or the fan was really loud, right? But buy a Moog 1, guess what? The fan's going to be loud, people have gotten better. Polybrew 12 has a very clever design in the venting to let air out without needing a loud fan. So, yeah, DM12 monopoly get a lot of love. I've never sat down with the Korg version of the 2600 versus the Behringer version. I think for me, like Anthony Marianelli's video on the Korg version kind of sold me on like that would be the version I would get. But if the price is more dramatic than I think it is, I could understand recommending the Behringer version there too, because that was kind of from that same era of like no one had anything in live sound reinforcement. Sorry, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like speakers and mixers and stuff? Because yeah, their speakers and mixers are great. We use a Behringer mixer at my job, and it's basically a Midas mixer, right? So Hans Volt, how's it going, my friend? We're just finishing up tonight. Yeah, I would love to check out the Hydrasynth on this channel at some point. And I mean, that's the thing too. Everybody comes after me whenever I don't talk about Behringer, but for instance, this year, I'm not going to be recommending modal anymore. Maybe the Carbonate or like the big ones, but the smaller ones, I got comments, people saying like, hey, these don't work as well as, you're recommending them, and they're not, they're breaking down, they have problems. And so I don't want to recommend them either. I chose not to recommend Erica Synth's Perkins because of the experience of a close friend of mine who bought it and had nothing but nightmares. And they found the real clincher for me was not that maybe they got a bad unit, because every company's going to put out a couple of duds, but it was the worst time with their customer service. And so I don't recommend their stuff either on this channel, but their fans don't come after me the way Behringer people do, because they feel like I'm picking on just them, and I'm not. But I just take seriously the responsibility of being aware of anytime I recommend something on this channel, someone out there will buy it. That's the nature of being a YouTuber, and I'm just aware of that responsibility, and I don't want to say, go get insert any synth, I don't care what the manufacturer is, and then have someone buy it and be like, have that in their head, like Vulture Culture said this synth was great and I usually like his videos, but I got it was all fucked up, or it doesn't sound anything like I thought it was. That's the only reason I take this as serious as I do. So let's see here, trying to catch up with the chat. EQ Feedback Destroyer, I used to have a Behringer Feedback Destroyer compressors. Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Harmonic Sonics, my Argon 8M has a funky rear out port. Can you explain that to me? So sorry. Yeah, modal Erica I avoid, which sucks because, I mean, I kind of feel like their modular stuff is more tested. I think I'm obviously not a modular guy yet, I want to be. When we get into that space, I'll be able to form some opinions there. But it seems like the stuff that's not modular might be where some of the issues creep in. I don't know. But the customer service side of it, I mean, that was surprising to me. Polyend too. See, that's interesting, Kieran. So tell me about Polyend, because I just put out a couple of videos on Polyend Synth, which they sent me, but I didn't get paid for. So I'd love to know what you think about it. Polyend Synth seemed to me to be a really well-built product, but I could see someone saying it feels cheaper, but I mean, $500 was crazy. But I do want to know what you guys think about it, because going into my best synths of the year video, I want to know what people's experiences are. Yeah, I mean, Yuki the Synth Dragon definitely swayed my opinion, Eternian, with his UBXA and Pro 800 videos, where he was like, look, I wanted to believe the dream too, but he got like multiple units that were fucked up, like, and fucked up keys and shit, and was just like, at this point, I'm not going to recommend Behringer anymore. I'm just going to recommend VSTs. Like, if you can't afford one little step up, and sometimes, I mean, I've said it before, Behringer gear is not even always the cheapest in a given category. It's the cheapest if you say, okay, like, what is this product good at? It could be the cheapest. But if you just start with a blank slate of like, what's the best hybrid synthesizer at a given price point, it's probably going to be something like the Mini Freak, not the Wave, right? We'll see, though. Let me catch up with the chat here. Let's see. Stereo cable output for the audio cables. One of them sometimes doesn't output sound. Tested over cables to make sure it wasn't the cable itself. The Argon 8M, is that the big version harmonic? I don't know the model numbers off the top of my head, or is it one of the smaller ones? Yeah. What I never want to do is be talking negatively about Behringer because there's like a bandwagon effect, or that that just like, I do think there would be people who would talk shit about Behringer entirely from like an elitist point of view, like a, you know, only buying the finest Moog synthesizers or something. But like, I'm not really like, you know, it's like Moog for me even. I kind of feel a very different set of feelings, but not as like, I gotta have a Moog. Like, I know people who are like, I gotta have a Moog. It's never, the ladder filter for me has never been the thing that I'm like, I gotta have. So it's like, I can talk shit about that company too, in the sense of, you know, Aquatic does point out that Yuki, Kieran and Aquatic point out that Yuki is pretty OCD. Yeah, because he seems, yeah, and I understand too, Kieran, that you're saying that Polyend Synth sounds good, but their past efforts have me off. They really have a bit of a PR problem after the synth, what was it, the Tracker Plus and the Play Plus thing. I didn't realize, but like my comment section was flooded with people being like, when's Synth Plus come out? So that was the first thing I asked him actually was, hey, can you give me an exact, you know, thing on that? And they said, yes, it will never happen. Now I'll be very, I mean, it will essentially, I won't work with Polyend again. And by work, I mean, I guess I'm not going to do any video on Polyend in a positive light if they put out a Synth Plus. Like, to me, that would be that they emailed me. I asked them directly. They emailed back. It will never happen if there's ever a Synth Plus. Like, to me, I'm done. Like, I'm not going to. That means the integrity is shot. So at least I have that from them. But I do see your point, Kieran and Aquatic, about Yuki, because he's had issues with Sequential. I think the big difference is how the companies handle it, because Sequential's always gotten back to them. They're very well known for that. Although Espencroft has recently angered them. So Aquatic has the Argon 8, no problems. My suspicion has always been they're bigger synths, they probably have down. And then when they tried to get into like the smaller synth market and like really compete on price, I think that's where some of the issues have come in for Modal, which sucks because I want to see Modal crush it. But I just got too many comments of people saying Modal wasn't there all the way. So don't get me wrong, Machine Storm. I get it with the the Moog Source was a really cool synth, but I mean that's like what we've been listening to as my synth parts is Moog Source samples from the Source sample pack that I sell at vultureculture.live. It's a very cool synth, but I don't need it, and I do love the sound of some of my other synths, and I've Dark Star. I gotta get a Dark Star at some point. And it does sound like the Moog Muse has some MIDI stuff, which I was surprised by. Talking to Carl from Angel Spit, I was saying there's no way they're gonna fuck up the Moog Muse because now they've got like Alesis firmware and all of that. The way, if you listen to Florian's video, it sounds like there's still some stuff in there. Yeah, I think Modal's really cool. I want to see them do good. I want to see Behringer do great. I want to see Behringer be the company I think they could be, which does get gear out to musicians at a great deal. I think right now they've gone a little too crazy. I mean, some of the prices on some of the gear is crazy good for what it is, but I do think it's sort of tipped a point where you can see it's starting to crack a bit, and I would love to see them kind of get back up to where they were a few years ago when they were putting out stuff like DM12 and focusing on innovating as well instead of only focusing on ripping off other companies. So I think this is a good place. We kind of got off on a topic, but it was kind of nice to talk to you guys about it, to be honest with you. It was a fun stream. IconDrum is great. I love it. I'd love to see the gate be able to be used on the reverb, and I'd love to see the distortion not clip the high end quite as hard, but those are very yeah. Oh, the Kajimi. Yeah, that would Kajimi. How do you say it? The black corp. I would love the black corp gear is just so sexy to me. If I wasn't a vintage guy, I would be a black corp guy probably, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Anyways, guys, continue to be excellent. I hope you guys have a happy holidays. I'm going to be back on this channel. It's about to say that I'm going to be back on Wednesday, but that's a lie. I didn't update the graphic because of New Year's, Christmas Eve, Christmas, New Year's Eve, and New Year's. I'm going to be streaming the next 2 weeks on Monday, not Wednesday. So you guys know. That way, we're not conflicting with the holidays. So we're going to be doing Mondays. So when it says see you next Wednesday, I will see you next Monday. Continue to be excellent, guys. I'll see you there.